Perfect. Can you guys hear me? Can I get a round of applause for everyone who's been here? Perfect. Okay, nice and warm. I moved to Dublin on a cold January day 9 years ago. I had nothing but a job and a coat that was not fitting for the Irish weather. Safe to say that I was experiencing the blues, but also we know what January is like here. There is a collective fear and a collective hangover. So, to avoid or to settle myself in, I worked long hours to avoid going back to an empty room and a cold bed. On one of the nights while I was working late, I decided to go on the DSPCA website and started looking at rescue dogs. And I was scrolling through it, and just why not? I have nothing better to do. It's either work or I do this. And I came across the most handsomest of little boys called Percy. I knew right there and then I wanted him. And I've been told this many times that I'm quite stubborn, but I'd like to say it, I know what I want. So Perseus, I wanted. I had to have him. And I was, my flatmate at the time, Neil, was also a colleague and now is a brother from another mother. And I told him about this idea. And the thing with my friendship with Neil is that every single time one of us comes up with an absolutely absurd idea, the other person is just like, yes, let's make this happen. And Perseus was one of our best absurd ideas. So as we decided to do that, we looked through our lease and saw that it said, no pets. Okay, grand. We benched the idea. But I was just like, you know what, we'll see where this goes. 6 months later, our landlord was selling the property and gave us some leeway, and they're like, we can, reduce your rent, but Neil and I saw a golden opportunity. I remember when I saw that email, both of us looked up from our screens at work and were like, we know what we're gonna ask. So we asked for a doggo, and we got the green light. We did everything within our capacity to make sure that we were ready for Perseus, but I remember my hands shaking with excitement when I went back on that website because it was 6 months later. What are the chances that Perseus still needs a home? But he was a handsome little guy. He would definitely not be available. I scrolled, and as I scrolled, I lost a bit of hope, but I held on to a little bit of hope. Perseus was the last and only dog on the last page. I knew that it was meant to be. So we went to go see him in Portlaoise, Neil and myself, figuring out how we're gonna do this, we're just gonna go with it. And I saw, as much as I was in love with him, I saw Neil also fall in love with Percy. I saw a new side to this person that I called a friend. But on the car ride back, the reality of that decision weighed on me, and I shared this with Neil. Was I ready? I had never, ever had a pet, or a dog for that matter. Would I be a good enough parent? I was scared, and I let him know all of this. And on top of that, we were gonna co-parent him. We had made the decision that if we went our separate ways, Neil would get to keep him. So yes, I signed up for heartbreak well in advance. But it was Percy. Percy is a gentle Irish boy. He is the silliest and also the cheekiest and also the smartest. I remember when I first met him, his markings were like no other. The best way that I can describe it is wearing Timberland boots while you walk outside and there's a fresh snowfall, as you know, on the concrete. The browns, the blacks, and the whites, they all just mesh so beautifully together on his face that it just made me fall even deeper in love with him. Percy was a howler. He was vocal. You know how huskies are. And I wanted a big dog because I was like, you know what? I live in Dublin. I want to be walking the streets with a big dog that can protect me. And Percy was scared of umbrellas, of plastic bags, everything that you could possibly imagine. I had to protect Percy where he was just like, what's happening? But still, Percy was my listener. He was my protector. He was also an escape artist. One night, I remember, outside of our gaff. I stepped outside, and it was pissing it down on a Friday, and it was windy. Sure, we all know. And I stepped outside, and Percy would normally just be chilling with me, seeing like, okay, Mom's stepping out for a smoke, or just getting some fresh air. And our patio door, which led to the main road, because we had a little patio, had swung open because of the wind. This boy knew his chance. In a millisecond, he just darted out. And I'm there, no shoes, no coat, no keys, in a onesie. The way I ran after him, and my heart stopped because I realized in that moment how much I loved him. Because with each cry, I could hear my voice weaken, as is now, because I just wanted to find him. I just wanted to make sure he was okay. And yes, I did find him. I found him tugging at the skirt of a lovely lady working the corner. And he was harassing her. And I'm like, I'm so sorry, I have no idea what's going on. Grabbed him by the collar and brought him home. But that was a lesson for me of how much I loved him. It came to the point where eventually I had to part ways with Percy because Neil and Naomi, his girlfriend, well, his wife now, found a wonderful farmhouse in Cavan. And I realized that I could never, ever give Percy that quality of life. So we went our separate ways. Now, that is a pain that I live with. It is a pain that I never sat with until I gave myself the permission to. And then the pandemic hit. So I didn't get to see him for over 2 years, even though we lived in the same country. And I was able to see him this summer. After 2 years, it was a beautiful, beautiful reunion. But I knew something was off about Percy. I mean, I've spent enough time with him. He has seen me at my worst, and I have seen him at his worst. But I knew something was off. I left that reunion with a heavy heart. A month after that, I received a phone call from Neil. I knew when I got the call that something was up. My heart stopped exactly the same way when he had darted out of my door that night where it was pissing it down and I was in a fucking onesie running after him. And I knew it was Percy. And Neil told me that there was some cancerous growth that was escalating and he was deteriorating badly. He couldn't tell me straight up because he said, I think it's good that you come see him, which I knew was that I had to come say goodbye. The reality of that mixed with the guilt and the shame of being like, I wasn't a good enough mother to him. I could have taken him out for more walks. I felt guilt for the separation. I felt guilt for abandoning him. I felt the guilt for not being able to see him for 2 years and only seeing him while he was declining. But I had to do something. So I went up to Cavan and I spent time with my boy. It was hard. I will distinctly remember the last time he slept in my bed while I was up in Cavan. And the jingle of his collar every time he'd shake off his sleep and do his yawn would be a squeal that would make Michael Jackson literally turn in his grave. I will remember that. And I remember when I was saying goodbye to him, I had my head on his forehead, and my tears were falling onto his nose, onto his beautiful, beautiful markings. And I told him that I loved him very much. And we went, then I had to come back to Dublin. Percy's sunset was in October. And my therapist says that I have to try and talk about him. I can't bring myself to talk about him, but this is me trying my best. Sorry. I also realized that grief is something that not a lot of us go through, but a lot of us don't know what to do with it because it is such a personal journey. But the way that I have navigated it, or I'm trying to navigate, is that the only way through grief is to go through it and see what remains, and that in itself is a process. Because people will not understand your grief. Especially, I've had people tell me, but it was just a dog, which is so hurtful. But I cannot expect anyone to understand what my heart has experienced and is continuing to experience. because Percy was a big part of my journey here. And one thing I do want to say, his name was Perseus, which is a Greek god, a Greek hero, and a half god. And we decided to stick with his name, which is Perseus. And we'd call him Percy. We would call him anything that started with any word that started with the letter P, like Pigglesworth, Premier Dog, Piggly-Woo, Precious, Parsley, everything, and he would respond to it. But when it comes to grief, you have to go through it to be able to understand what remains. And I know what remains is a precious, precious, precious love that I will carry with me for as long as I live. And this is me trying my best. Thank you, Percy, for getting me through today, for being here while I needed someone to call my own in a place that felt so unfamiliar. And I want you to know that I love you. You will always be my baby boy. And I hope you're happy. Thank you.